Hi everyone, this is Paulo from Drum Bass Academy, and you asked how to make the main bass from IMANU and Buunshin Nagow. So this is the original, and this is my recreation. Now, I know it's not the exact same bass, but I think it's close enough that I can teach you some pretty useful sound design principles. So let's get started. Alright, so here I am with initialize patch. So if I play this, it sounds like this. Not that interesting. So the first thing we need to do is to select a more interesting wavetable into oscillator A. For example, one on the spectral section. That's even worse. But we can make this a bit more interesting if we play with the wavetable position. Like this. And also if we add a warping mode into this wavetable. So for this type of basses, I like to add the bend minus warping mode. So take a look at how this sounds like. It becomes that a bit more aggressive and crunchy sound. So let's layer a sub and a noise on top of this oscillator. Let's change the noise sample. And now let's distort these 3 layers with some tube distortion. You can already see the potential that this setup has. Now notice one thing. Every time a note gets played and the sound resets itself, we get a different tonality. That is because we have this random phase knob turned all the way up. So if we bring this down, we now have the same sound every time. And we can even experiment with the starting point of this waveform. Let's leave it like that. And now let's add a filter into this oscillator. And the reason why we want to do that is because we want to add a bit more movement in the lower harmonics before we fit the distortion, which will create that growly type of sound. So for this, let's use a bandpass. And if you can hear it, it adds that growly and bowly movement. So let me move the cutoff. So now the only thing we need to do is to add an LFO into this cutoff. Make it a bit slower, like 1 bar. Set it on envelope and then play with this curve. Let's bring the tension of this point a bit up. Let's bring the amount of modulation a bit lower. There you go, we're getting there now. So after this, let's go into the effects and let's actually add a multiband compressor before the distortion. This is just to add a bit more gain before the distortion, which creates a bit more of noise. But because of that, we need to bring the noise a bit lower. And with this, we can do some interesting stuff. For example, we can map a different LFO into a level of the noise. And we can increase the rate to create a rattle type of movement. And we can even play with the shape of this LFO. I'm gonna leave it at 64. And then let's go back into the effects and let's add a chorus. Now let's set it to high pass by clicking on this button, so the very soft doesn't get affected by this chorus. Let's set it around 350 Hz. So we have a stereo fill on the harmonics that are on top of the sub. Let's also bring the mix a bit lower. And then let's add an EQ. And what we're gonna do with this EQ is we're gonna add a bell, and we're gonna use this bell to add even more movement in the lower harmonics with this frequency knob. So we're gonna map the same LFO into the frequency of this EQ, and we're gonna fine tune the movement that we want. I think that sounds fine. And that is gonna be it inside of Serum. And now obviously we need to do some extra post-processing to take this sound into a next level. And there is exactly what I think the value of this video is. So to get started with the post-processing phase, the first thing I'm gonna add is an EQ and a saturator. And the reason why we're doing this is because we're gonna use this EQ to manually shape the harmonics that we want to get distorted by this saturator. So for example, let me just crank up the drive right here. And if I use a very specific bell in this EQ, you can see how this bell determines the tone that we get after the distortion. So the first thing I'm gonna do is to try to get rid of the sub, because we don't want to distort the fundamental frequency. We want to focus on some harmonics here in the low mids, which give that evil growly sound. Just like that. So around 450 Hertz, those growly harmonics start to get pretty noticeable. And as you can see, playing with this bell can give you quite some room to experiment. So just for now, I'm gonna leave that bell around right there. And then I'm gonna add another EQ. And on this EQ, I'm gonna double up on the shaping of the sound. So that noise, I feel that it is too much. So maybe I will add a shelf. And then after this saturation module, I'm gonna add an OTT. Boost the time all the way up and add some gain. And now let's add a bit of ambience into the sound with a reverb. We can even add another chorus. And we can duplicate the OTT after the chorus. Now we can go back into this EQ and we can add certain points that we want to get distorted by the saturator. So as you can see, you can really dial in the combinations of harmonics in your sound. And if you play around with this enough, maybe you can replicate the actual sound. But I think that once you get this, you may want to experiment and create your own original versions of these types of sounds. One thing that I would suggest is to modulate the frequency of this EQ like this. That adds quite an interesting movement. And also try to experiment by boosting the sub a lot, or maybe the second harmonic, or the third one, or maybe adding a notch, because you can get really interesting results. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of fine tuning to replicate the sound that I showed you in the beginning. So after all the fine tuning, this is the final sound that I got. And as I showed you, the key for this sound is to experiment. You can experiment with the bend knob, or with the cutoff of the filter, and also with the wavetable. And that is it for the sound. So now with the tops from the original track, this is the final result. There you go. So that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you found it useful. Make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to not miss any of our future videos. Make sure to leave a comment with any tutorial that you want from us in the comments below. Follow us on Instagram because we post there pretty much daily. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.